Jane Eyre, the manga, let's talk about it. Jane Eyre was written in 1847 by Charlotte Bronte, or Currer Bell, which was the pseudonym she used back then. I suppose if you were a woman back in the 1840s and you wrote a book, no one was going to buy it. God forbid women be writing books when they should be at home, churning the butter, trimming the candles, weaving the threads, weaving fabrics, and dusting the ash off the ottoman, boiling oats. Fetch me my oats, woman. This story was written 170 years ago, and let me tell you, it still holds up to this day. It centers around a young orphaned girl called Jane Eyre, and she lives with her distant family, her aunt and some cousins, and she is mistreated. She is abused and she's not happy. She's unloved and she wants more. This is where you get your first introduction to Jane as a human being. She's very self-aware. Even from that young age, she knows what she wants and she knows that, she is being mistreated and that she deserves better, that there's more to life than what she's experiencing. She wants to go out into the world and make friends and find someone that she can love and be loved in return. This is something that comes across even when she's 7 and 8 years old. So eventually her aunt just gets fed up with her and sends Jane to Lowood School, which is a school with very harsh conditions. The headmaster at Lowood School is very strict and does subject Jane to some pretty bad stuff early on. But Jane is tough, she's lived for years in conditions like that, being abused and being mistreated, being teased, being bullied. Jane, through her relationship with her teacher and also a friendship with a girl called Helen Burns, Jane finds comfort at Lowood and feels like she belongs somewhere for the first time in her life. And I have to say, the friendship that blossoms with herself and Helen, it's beautifully portrayed in this manga, and it's so touching. The ending to it is just, it's beautiful. It got me emotional. I think that was one of my favorite parts of this manga. This whole sequence where Jane climbs into bed with Helen, Helen's very sick, and Jane hugs her and holds her. It's just... She goes through her time at Lowood as a student and then becomes a teacher for a couple of years and transitions into working as a governess, which is sort of like a nanny or an au pair, except the governesses were responsible for educating the child as well. So they would be a teacher, they'd be a caretaker. It was a pretty tough job, but Jane gets a job as a governess at a manor or estate called Thornfield. And the master at Thornfield is one Mr. Rochester. And that's where the core of this story lies, the relationship between Jane and Mr. Rochester. And at first Jane struggles at Thornfield because of the social structure. She's seen as quite lower class because she's an employee of the household, so she's not respected. Mr. Rochester has a lot of higher upper class visitors who come and mistreat Jane and treat her like a thing. So when Jane first develops feelings for Mr. Rochester, she feels like it's futile and there's no point because of the social structure. She doesn't have a chance. Mr. Rochester's going to find some rich, beautiful socialite to marry for her wealth and power and influence, and Jane is just a foolish young girl who will never be loved by a man. But little does Jane know that Mr. Rochester is sick of society. He's disillusioned with his position. He doesn't want to go through the rigmarole of, dinner parties and champagne and courting and horse riding and what have you. He is searching for something real, something more deep and meaningful. He wants someone who is going to love him, not just for his wealth and his status and his power. He really just wants someone who's going to love him for him, and that's difficult. There is the question of, Mr. Rochester is 20 years older than Jane, and I think in today's society, if you had an 18-year-old girl with a 38-year-old man, some questions would be asked. What do you guys have in common? What do you guys do? You're at completely different stages of life. But it just works in this book. It's the 1840s. Jane and Mr. Rochester, they're exactly what the other person is looking for. I think why the relationship makes sense is Jane is so uncompromisingly herself. She doesn't give in to Mr. Rochester. She doesn't let his power or, age influence her or dominate her in any way. She's just herself, and she wants to be loved for who she is. So even though on the surface there is a power imbalance, you never feel like that's actually the case. You never feel like Mr. Rochester's power is being abused and manipulating Jane in any way. Jane loves him for him, despite his problems, and there are some problems with Mr. Rochester. I thought the art was just beautiful. One thing you don't get a lot of compared to maybe like if you watch the films or miniseries is the gothic, gloomy, creepy nature of Thornfield, which is where most of the story is set. Of course, for those who know the story well, Rochester is hiding quite the secret at Thornfield, and it's pretty scary and it's pretty creepy. And there's some sequences in this manga which are a little bit frightening, but you don't quite get that oppressive, gothic, dark feel that comes across in this compared to, say, one of the miniseries or maybe the original novel itself. If you're a visual person and you want to experience the story of Jane Eyre, this is the way to go. I mean, it's just beautifully made. The story itself, it's got everything. It's got love, it's got romance, tension, conflict, mystery. There's some really great mystery and creepy elements to this that I didn't know existed. It covers many themes: family, religion, home, identity, class, social status. But at the end of the day, the core story, the core love story and relationship between Jane and Rochester is the selling point here. And it's done so well. You really feel like these are real characters and they're exactly what the other person needs, and you're rooting for them. You really want them to be together. And there's some drama, there's some hiccups, some pretty wild stuff happens, but you just really want these characters to end up together. More so for Jane. You want Jane to just be happy. She's such a great character. And the manga really conveys the emotion of the story fantastically. The artwork is great, the facial expressions. Jane, comes across as very cute but strong, and Rochester's this sort of wild man, emotions all over the place. It captures the characters and their eccentricities and personalities really well. Drawings and the art were done by Soneko Lee, and the story adaptation by Crystal S. Chan. The company that made this is Udon Entertainment. They have like a sub-branch called Manga Classics. So I think the manga is a great way to experience Jane Eyre. I highly recommend picking it up. Or you can watch me read it. Just click the link in the description and I'll read it for you. It's that easy.